I spent 5 years poisoning myself with wolfsbane to hide from my fated mate. 5 years of nausea, weakness, and constant pain, just to keep Alpha King George William from sensing what I was. It worked perfectly until the winter solstice, when my body finally gave out, and my heat exploded back to life with the force of a supernova. I stumbled through a blizzard, half dead and burning from the inside, until I collapsed inside what I thought was an abandoned hunting lodge. It wasn't abandoned. George was there, and the moment my scent hit him, I watched his legendary control shatter like glass. His eyes went from ice blue to molten gold, his hands started shaking, and his voice dropped to something barely human when he said, "You're the ghost I've been chasing for 5 years. And you've been poisoning yourself to hide from me." I expected him to claim me right there. Every instinct, every law, every tradition said he had the right. Instead, he did something that broke me more completely than force ever could. He asked permission. "May I help you, Amparo? Or do you want me to walk away and let you suffer alone?" In that moment, I realized I'd been running from the wrong alpha, because the one who'd finally found me was the only one who'd ever given me a choice. Ever run so hard from something you wanted that you nearly killed yourself trying to escape it? Drop a comment if you've ever sabotaged your own happiness, and smash that subscribe button, because this story gets wild when Amparo's sacred bloodline is revealed and suddenly everyone wants to claim her. The wolfsbane tasted like death and regret, but I swallowed it anyway. 5 years of this poison, carefully measured every morning in tea that smelled like rotting flowers and burned going down. 5 years of nausea, so constant I'd forgotten what normal appetite felt like. 5 years of weakness that made climbing stairs feel like running marathons. But 5 years of freedom from heat. 5 years of hiding from fated mates and forced ceremonies and alphas who thought Omega meant property. Worth it, I told myself for the 1,000th time, gagging as the wolfsbane settled into my stomach like liquid fire. Totally worth it. My wolf disagreed. She'd been disagreeing for 5 years, whimpering every time I took the poison, begging me to stop slowly killing us both. But my wolf was the reason I needed the wolfsbane in the first place, her biological imperative to find a mate, to submit to heat, to let instinct override choice. I'd rather die slowly than live as someone's breeding trophy. Amparo? My co-worker Riley appeared in the library break room doorway, her human nose mercifully unable to detect the wolfsbane's medicinal stench. "You okay? You look really pale." "Fine," I lied, forcing a smile that probably looked more like a grimace. "Just didn't sleep well last night." "You never sleep well. You should see a doctor about that." If only she knew. Human doctors couldn't help with supernatural poisoning, and werewolf healers would immediately recognize what I was doing and report me to the nearest pack. Suppressing heat was illegal in most territories, considered unnatural interference with divine mate bonds, or some similar traditional garbage. I'd been breaking that law for 5 years and planned to keep breaking it until I figured out a permanent solution. Or until the poison killed me. Whichever came first. "I'll think about it," I told Riley, gathering my things and heading back to the library's main floor. The town was small, quiet, primarily human, with maybe a dozen supernatural residents who kept to themselves. Perfect for someone like me who needed to disappear. I'd been working here for 3 years, ever since my previous hiding spot in the mountains became too isolated, and I started having dangerous thoughts about whether anyone would notice if I just stopped taking the wolfsbane and let nature take its course. Working around humans helped. Reminded me there was a world beyond pack politics and mate bonds and the biological imperatives that drove werewolf society. A world where women chose their own partners, where relationships were built on mutual interest rather than scent compatibility, where nobody cared about heat cycles or alpha dominance or omega submission. Of course, that world also didn't have the supernatural strength, the enhanced senses, the connection to moon magic that made being a werewolf occasionally worth the political nightmare. But I'd learned to appreciate the trade-off. The library was quiet that afternoon, Just a few regulars browsing the fiction section and a handful of students using the computers. I settled into my usual spot behind the circulation desk and tried to ignore the way my hands were shaking. The wolfsbane was hitting harder lately. Not surprising, 5 years of constant poisoning had probably done permanent damage to my system. My wolf was getting weaker every cycle, her presence in my mind dimmer, her protests against the poison more desperate and less coherent. I was killing her to save us both. It was the definition of fucked up. But what choice did I have? Return to Frostfang and get awarded to whichever of Darius's sons won their barbaric challenges? Run to a different pack and hope they treated Omegas better? Try to live as a rogue without pack protection and probably get killed or captured within weeks. No. This was the best option. Hide among humans, suppress the heat, and hope that eventually the mate bond instinct would fade enough that I could just exist. Quietly. Safely. Alone. My wolf whimpered at that last thought. Even weakened by poison, she hated the isolation. Werewolves were pack creatures. Being cut off from other wolves for 5 years had been its own kind of torture. But not as bad as the alternative. I made it through my shift on autopilot, checking out books and answering questions while my body fought against the wolfsbane, and my mind fought against the memories of why I'd started taking it in the first place. The winter solstice was tomorrow. Longest night of the year, when supposedly the moon goddess paid special attention to werewolves and blessed pack gatherings. I'd spent the last 5 solstices alone, deliberately avoiding any supernatural celebrations. This year would be no different. I closed the library at 6, bundled up against the December cold, and walked home through streets decorated with human holiday lights that had nothing to do with pack traditions or moon worship. The normality was soothing. Grounding. A reminder that I'd built a life here, small as it was. My apartment was tiny, studio space above a bakery that smelled constantly of fresh bread. But it was mine. Paid for with money I earned, decorated with things I chose, occupied by exactly one person who answered to nobody. I made dinner, simple pasta, because complex cooking required energy I didn't have. The wolfsbane had made everything taste like ash anyway, but I forced myself to eat because malnutrition on top of poisoning seemed like a bad combination. After dinner, I tried to read. Failed. The words kept blurring together. My concentration shot to hell. My wolf was more agitated than usual, pacing restlessly in the back of my mind like she sensed something I couldn't. What's wrong? I asked her aloud, which was probably a sign I'd been alone too long. Talking to your inner wolf was normal. Doing it out loud in an empty apartment was concerning. She didn't answer in words. Wolves rarely did. But I felt her anxiety spike, felt her pressing against my consciousness with urgent warning I didn't understand. I already took the wolfsbane today, I reminded her. Heat's not due for another week anyway. My wolf's panic intensified. Then the pain hit. It wasn't the normal wolfsbane nausea or the dull ache of suppressed heat. This was catastrophic, white-hot agony that started in my core and radiated outward until every nerve ending felt like it was on fire. I collapsed off the couch, hitting the floor hard enough to knock the breath from my lungs. My wolf was screaming now, not in words, but in pure terror and desperate need. This wasn't supposed to happen. The wolfsbane was supposed to prevent this. 5 years of perfect suppression, and now my heat was breaking through anyway like a dam bursting under too much pressure. My temperature spiked so high, I could feel my skin burning. My scent exploded back to life. 5 years of accumulated omega pheromones releasing all at once in a wave so powerful it made my eyes water. Through the haze of heat and pain, one coherent thought managed to form. I was going to die like this. Alone in a studio apartment, burning from the inside out, my body trying to complete a biological process I'd been suppressing for 5 years. My wolf had a different plan. She surged forward with strength I didn't know she still possessed, forcing a partial shift despite my human consciousness screaming no. She took control of my legs, my instincts, my desperate need to survive this. And then she ran. I barely remember leaving the apartment. Barely remember stumbling down the stairs, through the bakery's back door, into the street where the first snow of winter was starting to fall. My wolf knew where we were going. She'd known for 5 years, apparently, some instinct I'd been suppressing along with everything else. North. We needed to go north, to the mountains, to something she recognized as safety, even though I had no idea what that meant. The blizzard hit within minutes of leaving town. December in the mountains was brutal, temperatures dropping to dangerous levels, visibility reduced to almost nothing. I should have turned back. Should have called for help. Should have done literally anything besides running through a snowstorm while my body burned with heat that was probably going to kill me. But my wolf was in control now, and she had one goal: get north. Get home. Get safe. I don't know how long I ran. Hours, maybe. The heat made time meaningless. Everything reduced to the desperate need to reach whatever destination my wolf had decided was crucial. I saw the cabin through the snow like a mirage. Dark wood structure, smoke rising from the chimney, lights glowing in windows that promised warmth and safety. My wolf drove me toward it with the last of our combined strength. I hit the door hard enough to bruise, scrabbled at the handle with hands that barely remembered how to grip, and tumbled inside as the door gave way. Warmth. Blessed, beautiful warmth after the freezing blizzard. I collapsed on the hardwood floor, my entire body shaking, my heat still burning through me, but the immediate danger of hypothermia averted. I heard footsteps. Sensed someone approaching. Managed to lift my head enough to see boots, then legs, then the face of the person who'd just found an omega in catastrophic heat collapsed in their home. Ice blue eyes met mine. Alpha dominance washed over me like a physical force, making my wolf whimper with need and recognition. And a voice, deep, controlled, unmistakably alpha, said with barely restrained tension, "You're real. You're actually real. 5 years I've been searching, and you're real." Then I passed out, my last coherent thought being that I'd just accidentally run straight into the worst possible situation. An alpha's home. During heat. With no wolfsbane left in my system to suppress my scent. I'd survived 5 years of careful hiding only to stumble directly into the fate I'd been running from. She spent 5 years poisoning herself to avoid this exact scenario and still ended up in an alpha's cabin during heat. Worst luck ever, or the moon goddess finally done with her nonsense. Drop your theories and subscribe, because what happens next when Amparo wakes up is not what you'd expect from an alpha. I woke up in a bed that wasn't mine, covered in blankets that smelled like pine and winter storms and alpha. Panic hit immediately. I was in heat, in an unknown location, surrounded by alpha scent so thick I could taste it. Every instinct screamed danger. This was exactly the situation my mother had warned me about, the scenario I'd spent 5 years poisoning myself to prevent. I tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. My body felt like it was on fire from the inside, the heat still raging despite the unconsciousness that must have given my system a brief respite. 5 years of suppression hadn't just delayed the inevitable, it had made my heat catastrophically intense when it finally broke through. "You're awake." The voice came from across the room, controlled, careful, deliberately non-threatening. "Try not to move too quickly. Your body's in shock from the heat surge combined with what I'm guessing was hypothermia." I turned my head slowly, finding the source of the voice. He sat in a chair positioned carefully near the door, close enough to help if needed, far enough to not be immediately threatening. The alpha from last night, though I'd barely registered anything beyond his eyes. He was younger than I expected, maybe late 20s, with dark hair and those ice blue eyes that seemed to see straight through me. Powerful build that he held with deliberate stillness, like a predator consciously restraining itself. Alpha King. My wolf supplied the information with certainty I didn't want to acknowledge. Alpha King George William. Our mate. No. I croaked, my voice raw from heat and screaming during my desperate flight through the blizzard. "No, that's not, you can't be." "I am," he confirmed gently. And based on how strongly the mate bond just activated when you recognized me, you know it's true. The bond. Moon goddess. I could feel it now. A connection I'd been completely unaware of for 5 years suddenly snapping into place like it had always been there, just waiting for acknowledgement. Warm and right, and terrifying in its intensity. I've been poisoning myself to avoid this, I said, probably too honest given the situation but unable to muster any self-preservation instincts. Wolfsbane. Every day, for 5 years. To suppress my heat and hide my scent. George's expression flickered with something that might have been pain. I know. I can smell the poison in your system. It's why I couldn't track you. The wolfsbane masked everything that would have let me find you earlier. Good. That was the point. Why? He leaned forward slightly, then caught himself and returned to that careful stillness. Why run? Why poison yourself for 5 years? We're fated mates, Amparo. The moon goddess herself. The moon goddess doesn't have to live with the consequences of her mate assignments, I interrupted bitterly. She doesn't have to deal with alphas who think fated mates means ownership, who see Omega as breeding stock, who... I stopped as another heat wave hit, my body convulsing with the biological need for an alpha's touch. George moved before I could tell him not to, crossing the room in 2 strides, but he stopped at the edge of the bed rather than touching me. May I help you? He asked, and the question was so unexpected I almost didn't process it. What? May I help you through the heat? He spoke slowly, clearly, like he was making sure there could be no misunderstanding. You're in agony. Your body is trying to complete a process you've suppressed for 5 years. Without an alpha to ground you, this heat could kill you. So, I'm asking permission, may I help? Or, do you want me to walk away and let nature take its course? I stared at him. You're asking permission? To do what every instinct and law says you have the right to just take. I don't want rights based on instinct and law. I want consent based on your actual choice. George's eyes had shifted from ice blue to something warmer, more gold, showing his wolf's presence without losing human control. I've been searching for you for 5 years, Amparo. Not to claim you against your will, but because the mate bond told me you were my equal, my partner, the person the moon goddess designated as my match. That designation means nothing if you don't want it to. I don't understand. Another wave of heat made my words come out as gasps. Why would you? Alphas don't. Alphas should, he corrected firmly. And I'm trying to be the kind of alpha who does. So tell me clearly, do you consent to my help grounding your heat? Or do you want me to leave you alone? The question hung between us, impossible and genuine. My body screamed yes, desperate for relief from the burning agony. My mind screamed no, terrified this was manipulation disguised as choice. But my wolf, my weak, desperate, 5 years suppressed wolf, made the decision. Help me, I whispered. Please help me. George moved immediately but carefully, sitting on the edge of the bed and extending his hand without actually touching me yet. I'm going to use my alpha presence to ground your wolf and help regulate your temperature. It's going to feel intense because the bond is new and you've been separated from pack dynamics for years. If at any point you want me to stop, say the word, and I will. Understood. I nodded, beyond words. His hand settled on my forehead, and power flooded through me. Alpha dominance channeled, not as force, but as support. My wolf responded immediately, her frantic panic calming under the weight of recognition and safety. The heat didn't disappear, but it became manageable, the agony reducing to something I could breathe through. That's it, George said quietly, his voice dropping into alpha cadence that bypassed conscious thought and spoke directly to my wolf. You're safe. You're protected. Let the heat pass naturally, without fighting it. I don't know how long he sat there, hand on my forehead, alpha presence wrapping around me like a blanket made of power and safety. Long enough for the worst of the heat wave to pass. Long enough for my conscious mind to stop screaming danger and start processing what was actually happening. An alpha king, arguably the most powerful werewolf in the region, was helping me through heat without demanding anything in return, was asking permission before every touch, was treating me like a person with agency rather than a biological imperative to be managed. It was so far outside my experience with alphas that I genuinely didn't know how to process it. When the heat wave finally subsided, George withdrew his hand and returned to the chair, maintaining that careful distance. Better? Yes, I admitted. Thank you. Don't thank me yet. That was just the first wave. Heat typically lasts 3 days, and yours is going to be severe given the suppression period. He pulled a bottle of water from somewhere and handed it to me. Drink. You're dehydrated. I drank gratefully, my throat raw and burning. Why are you doing this? Doing what? Helping my mate through heat? Asking permission. Treating me like I have a choice. Not just. I gestured vaguely. You know, taking what tradition and biology say you're entitled to. George's expression turned serious. Because I've spent my entire reign trying to change pack culture from dominance-based to consent-based. Because my father ruled through force and created a system where omegas were property and alphas were tyrants. Because I looked at that system and decided I wanted no part of it. He met my eyes. And because the mate bond is supposed to be a gift from the moon goddess, not a prison sentence. If you don't want me, if you don't choose this bond freely, then it's worthless regardless of what fate designated. You really mean that? I really do. Another heat wave started building, and I felt my control slipping again. It's coming back. The heat. I know. May I help again? Yes, I said without hesitation this time. George returned to the bed, but instead of just his hand on my forehead, he arranged us both more comfortably, me lying down properly, him sitting beside me where his alpha presence could wrap around me more completely without requiring uncomfortable positioning. Tell me about the wolfsbane, he said as he worked to ground my wolf. When did you start taking it? 5 years ago, right after I ran from my home pack. The heat made me more honest than I probably should have been, but George's presence seemed to demand truth. They were going to award me to one of the alpha's sons. Not let me choose, not court me properly, award me. Like a trophy for winning their barbaric challenges. George's growl was low and dangerous. Frostfallen pack. You know them? I know of them. Darius Thornback runs the most traditionalist, regressive pack in the Northern Territories. I've been trying to bring them into compliance with modern Omega protection laws for years. He keeps finding loopholes. George's hand tightened slightly on my shoulder. You ran from there to avoid force mating? I ran from there to avoid being property. The forced mating was just the specific threat. I closed my eyes, letting his alpha presence soothe my wolf while I processed the conversation. I heard about a traveling healer who sold wolfsbane to omegas who needed to hide. Found her, learned the dosing, and spent the next 5 years slowly poisoning myself to maintain freedom. That's why I couldn't find you. 5 years of searching, following rumors and whispers of an omega who smelled like my fated mate, and you'd suppressed everything that would have let me track you properly. Sorry for the inconvenience, I said, too exhausted for real sarcasm. Don't apologize for surviving. George shifted slightly, maintaining contact but adjusting his position. I understand why you ran. Why you hid. The system I'm trying to reform created the exact situation that made you feel like poisoning yourself was the better option. That's not your failure, it's ours. The alphas who built this culture, the packs that maintained it, the tradition that valued dominance over consent. You're not like other alphas. I'm trying not to be. Whether I'm succeeding is a different question. He was quiet for a moment. Amparo, I need to tell you something, and you're not going to like it. Dread settled in my stomach despite the heat's distraction. What? Your wolf is severely weakened. 5 years of constant wolfsbane poisoning has damaged your system in ways I'm not sure can be fully healed. The heat breaking through now, it's not just because you missed a dose or got careless. It's because your body literally can't maintain the suppression anymore. The poison was killing you, slowly, but inevitably. I know, I admitted. I've known for months that I was reaching the limit. I didn't know what else to do. And now? George asked gently. Now that the heat's broken through? Now that you've found your fated mate whether you wanted to or not? What do you want to do? It was the question I'd been avoiding for 5 years. The one I'd used wolfsbane to postpone indefinitely. What did I actually want? Not force mating. Not being property. Not surrendering autonomy to biological imperative. But also, and this was harder to admit, not being alone forever. Not slowly killing myself with poison. Not spending my life running from a bond the moon goddess had apparently designated for me. I don't know, I said honestly. I'm terrified of alpha dominance and forced bonds. But I'm also exhausted from hiding and poisoning myself. I don't know how to reconcile those things. Then don't, George suggested. Not yet. Right now, focus on surviving the heat. Let me help you through it without making any permanent decisions. After 3 days, when the biological crisis passes, then we can figure out what comes next. You'd really do that? Help me through heat without demanding I accept the mate bond. I'd really do that. You're my fated mate, Amparo. Which means I'll wait as long as necessary for you to choose me freely. And if you never do, if you decide the bond isn't worth the risk, then I'll help you find somewhere safe to live and leave you alone. He meant it. I could feel the sincerity through the bond, through his alpha presence, through the way he held himself with such careful restraint. Maybe I'd been running from the wrong thing all along. An alpha king who asks permission? Who treats heat as a medical crisis rather than an opportunity. Somebody check if George is actually real, because that level of decency seems fictional. Comment if you're already falling for him, and hit subscribe because the next 3 days of heat grounding are going to be intense and emotional. I apologize for the confusion. Let me continue with the remaining chapters of the story. She concealed her heat from the Alpha King until he suddenly snapped, featuring Amparo Barnett and George William. The heat lasted exactly as George predicted, 3 days of biological crisis that would have killed me without his help. But those 3 days became something I never expected, the most intimate experience of my life, and not in the way Frostfang's crude jokes about omega heat had prepared me for. George didn't claim me, didn't take advantage of my vulnerability, didn't treat the heat as an opportunity for anything beyond helping me survive it. Instead, he talked to me. Between the waves of heat that required his alpha presence to ground me, during the brief periods of relative clarity when my body wasn't actively trying to combust, George asked questions. About my life before running, about the 5 years in hiding, about my job at the library, my tiny apartment above the bakery, the careful routine I'd built to survive alone. And he answered my questions too. About being Alpha King at 23 when his father died. About the political nightmare of trying to reform pack culture while maintaining enough traditional authority that rival alphas didn't see him as weak. About the 5 years he'd spent searching for a mate he'd scented once at a regional gathering and never forgotten. I thought I'd imagined you, George admitted during the second day, his hand resting on my shoulder while his alpha presence wrapped around my exhausted wolf. 5 years of searching with nothing but a 5-second memory and a scent I couldn't track. My counsel thought I was obsessed. Several suggested I was using the lost mate as an excuse to avoid political marriages. Were you? I asked, genuinely curious. Partially, he admitted with a slight smile. The political marriage proposals were uniformly terrible. Betas positioning their daughters for power, rival alphas offering alliances sealed with bonds I didn't want. Using you as excuse to decline them was convenient. But not the only reason you searched. No. The mate bond, even incomplete, even barely acknowledged, was real. I felt you out there somewhere. I knew the moon goddess had designated someone as my match. Couldn't let go of that knowledge even when it seemed irrational. He shifted slightly, maintaining contact but adjusting his cramping muscles. What about you? Did you feel the bond before the heat broke through? I considered lying, but George's presence seemed to demand honesty.
No.
I was so focused on suppressing everything with wolfsbane that I never even noticed. If we'd passed each other on the street before yesterday, I wouldn't have recognized you. Because you were actively preventing recognition. Because I was surviving the only way I knew how. I corrected. Don't romanticize it, George. I wasn't tragically pining for lost love. I was poisoning myself to maintain freedom from exactly this situation. Fair point. He was quiet for a moment. Does it bother you that I knew about the bond for 5 years while you were completely unaware? I don't know yet. Ask me again after the heat passes, and I can think clearly. Another wave was building, and I braced myself for the now familiar burning agony. It's coming back. I know. May I? Yes. His alpha presence intensified, wrapping around me like armor against the heat's assault. I'd stopped questioning his permission asking after the first day, started to appreciate it, actually, as evidence that he meant what he said about consent mattering. Tell me something about yourself that has nothing to do with being Alpha King, I requested once the wave subsided enough for conversation. George looked surprised. Like what? Anything. Hobbies, interests, embarrassing childhood stories. Something that makes you a person instead of just a title and a biological imperative. He laughed quietly. I restore old books in my spare time. Leather binding, gold leafing, the whole traditional process. My father thought it was shamefully mundane for an alpha king to have craftsman hobbies, which made me more determined to continue. You restore books? I couldn't keep the surprise from my voice. I restore books. I learned from the royal librarian when I was a teenager, and she needed help with a damaged archive. There's something meditative about the work, taking something broken and making it whole again through patience and care. He met my eyes. What about you? What does a werewolf librarian do in her limited free time? Read, mostly. Fiction, history, anything that lets me pretend I'm somewhere else. I managed a weak smile. Not exactly exciting compared to being Alpha King. Being Alpha King is 90% boring council meetings and 10% crisis management. Your reading habit sounds significantly more appealing. We talked through the second day like that, sharing pieces of ourselves that had nothing to do with mate bonds or pack politics. I learned that George hated formal dinners, but loved cooking for himself when he had time. That he'd wanted to be a teacher before his father died and duty called. That his favorite childhood memory was his mother reading him adventure stories before she passed away when he was 10. I told him about my mother's healing knowledge, the garden she'd maintained despite Frostfang's harsh climate, the way she'd taught me to identify medicinal plants and their uses. About my father's death in a territorial dispute that was really just an excuse for violence. About the 5 years of isolation that had been lonely and difficult but had also taught me I could survive without pack support. By the third day, I knew George William better than I'd known anyone in years. Knew his tells when he was stressed, jaw tightening almost imperceptibly, his genuine laugh versus his political smile, the way his eyes shifted color when his wolf was close to the surface. And he knew me. The parts I'd hidden even from myself during 5 years of running. The heat's passing, George observed during the third evening, his hand still on my forehead but the burning intensity of my wolf's need finally fading to manageable discomfort. Your temperature is dropping, your scent is stabilizing. The crisis is over. Relief flooded through me, followed immediately by anxiety. The heat had been an excuse to postpone decision-making, a biological emergency that required George's presence without me having to examine what that presence meant long-term. Now I had to actually choose. What happens next? I asked. George withdrew his hand carefully, returning to the chair he'd barely left in 3 days. His exhaustion was obvious, grounding an omega through catastrophic heat while maintaining absolute control over his own alpha instincts had taken a toll. Now you decide, he said simply. The mate bond exists whether we acknowledge it or not. But completing it, accepting me as your permanent mate, allowing me to mark you, building a life together. That requires your active consent. So what do you want, Amparo? I sat up slowly, my body weak but functional for the first time in days. I don't know. 3 days ago I would have said I wanted nothing to do with mate bonds or alphas or any of this.
But now.
Now, he prompted gently. Now I'm confused. You're nothing like what I expected from an alpha king. You've been kind and patient and respectful in ways I didn't know were possible. But I'm still terrified of surrendering autonomy, of becoming property, of losing myself in a bond one didn't choose originally. Those are valid fears, especially given your history with Frost Fong. George leaned forward, his expression serious. So here's what I propose. Stay here at the lodge for a few more days. No heat, no biological coercion, just us getting to know each other while you recover and decide what you want. If after that time you decide you don't want the bond, I'll help you establish a new identity somewhere safe and leave you alone. You'd really do that? Let your fated mate go. I'd really do that. Because a mate bond without genuine choice is just a different kind of prison, and I refuse to become your jailer. I studied him, this alpha king who'd been searching for me for 5 years, but was now offering to let me go. Who'd asked permission before every touch during 3 days of heat. Who treated my autonomy as more important than his own desires. I want to stay, I decided. Not because I've made any decisions about the bond, but because you're right, I need time to think clearly. And I'd like to know you better when I'm not delirious with heat. Relief flickered across George's face. Then stay. As long as you need. He stood, stretching muscles that had been cramped from 3 days of careful positioning. There's a bathroom through that door. Clean clothes in the dresser. I'll make dinner, actual food, not the bland heat management meals you've been tolerating. George. He paused at the doorway. Thank you, I said quietly, for helping me survive this. For asking permission. For treating me like a person instead of a prize. You are a person, Amparo. That shouldn't be something to thank me for. It should be the bare minimum. He smiled slightly. Now go clean up. You smell like 3 days of heat and sweat, and while I find it appealing, you might feel better after a shower. I threw a pillow at him, surprised by my own playfulness. He caught it easily, laughing as he left the room. Maybe, just maybe, I'd been running from the wrong alpha all along. For days after the heat ended, I was stronger, clearer, and still completely uncertain about what I wanted. George had been perfect, patient without being passive, present without being overbearing, giving me space to process, while making it clear he'd wait as long as necessary for my decision. We'd fallen into a comfortable routine, mornings spent reading, he had an impressive library in the lodge, afternoons cooking together, evenings talking about everything from pack politics to favorite books to embarrassing childhood memories. It was domestic and easy and nothing like what I'd expected from an alpha king. It was also making my decision increasingly difficult. You're overthinking again, George observed during breakfast on day 5. I can practically hear your mind spinning from here. I'm trying to figure out if I'm feeling genuine attraction or just mate bond compulsion, I admitted. How do I know the difference? You probably can't, not completely. The mate bond is always going to influence attraction. That's how it works. He poured more coffee for both of us. But I can tell you this. If you were feeling only bond compulsion, you'd have accepted me immediately during the heat when your wolf was in control and your rational mind was suppressed. The fact that you're still questioning, still analyzing, still making conscious choices, that suggests you're not being controlled by biology. Or, I'm just stubborn. That too. He smiled. But stubbornness in the face of mate bond pressure is actually a good sign. It means your will is strong enough to override instinct when necessary. Before I could respond, someone knocked on the lodge door. George's expression immediately shifted from relaxed to alert. I'm not expecting anyone. Should I hide? Old instincts from 5 years of running kicked in automatically.
No.
You're not doing anything wrong by being here. He stood, moving toward the door with that careful control that reminded me he was Alpha King, not just George, who restored books and made excellent pasta. Stay behind me, just in case. He opened the door to reveal an elderly woman with silver hair and a healer's bag. She took one look at me, then at George, and her eyes widened with recognition and concern. "Your Majesty," she said formally, "forgive the intrusion, but when you didn't return to the palace after 3 days, the council sent me to check on you."
Infine, Ealer Miriam.
Just taking personal time. George's tone was carefully neutral, not confirming or denying anything about why he'd been gone. Miriam's gaze shifted to me, and I felt her assessing in the way only experienced healers could. "That's the Omega whose scent you've been tracking for 5 years. The one who's been using wolfsbane to hide." "How did you?" I started. 5 years of constant poisoning leaves markers in your system that any decent healer can identify. She stepped inside without waiting for invitation, professional mode overriding social niceties. "May I examine you? I need to assess the damage and see if it's reversible." I looked at George, uncertain. "It's your choice," he said immediately. "But Miriam is trustworthy. She's been royal healer since before I was born, and she's kept more secrets than anyone in the palace." "Fine," I agreed reluctantly. The examination was thorough and uncomfortable. Miriam checked my heart rate, my lung function, my reflexes, and several things I didn't have medical knowledge to identify. She drew blood for testing, muttered to herself in medical terminology, and generally made me feel like a particularly interesting specimen. "Well," George asked when she finally stepped back. "The wolfsbane has done significant damage," Miriam said bluntly. "Her wolf is severely weakened, her healing abilities are compromised, and her scent glands are permanently altered. Some of this may improve over time without the poison, but full recovery is unlikely." The words hit harder than I expected, confirming what I'd suspected but not wanted to acknowledge. "However," Miriam continued, "there's something else. Something I didn't expect to see." She turned to me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "You're Moonfireborn." Silence. "I'm what?" I asked. "Moonfireborn. A bloodline so rare it's been considered mythical for 3 generations." Miriam pulled out a small crystal that glowed softly when she held it near my skin. "See those silver marks appearing? Those are moonfire indicators. They've been suppressed along with everything else by the wolfsbane, but now that you've been through heat with your fated mate, they're manifesting." I looked down at my arms, seeing silvery patterns I'd never noticed before tracing across my skin like delicate tattoos. "What does that mean?" George asked, his voice carefully controlled in a way that suggested he knew exactly what it meant and didn't like the implications. "It means she's not just an Omega. She's a sacred bloodline Omega whose bond with an Alpha amplifies royal power exponentially. The old histories are full of stories about Moonfire Omegas creating dynasties, establishing territories, and fundamentally changing pack hierarchy through their bonds." Miriam looked between us. "If you complete the mate bond, you'll be the most powerful Alpha in living memory. And she'll be the most valuable Omega in the supernatural world." "I don't want to be valuable," I said immediately. "I just want to be left alone." "Too late for that," Miriam said bluntly. "The moment your heat scent escaped into the world, even temporarily, even muted by 5 years of wolfsbane, other alphas with sensitive enough noses would have detected the moonfire markers. They'll be coming. All of them. Every alpha with ambition, every pack with dynasty dreams, every wolf who thinks bonding with a moonfire Omega might elevate their status." "They can't," George said flatly. "She's my fated mate. The bond is already partially formed. Any alpha who tries to claim her would be violating sacred mate law." "Sacred mate law won't stop them from trying," Miriam corrected. "Especially once they learn she's been running for 5 years, that the bond isn't complete, that she's been actively avoiding you. They'll argue you have no claim on an Omega who's refused the bond, that her value makes her an exception to normal mate protocols." "That's ridiculous," I protested. That's pack politics when rare bloodlines are involved. Miriam began packing her supplies. Your Majesty, you need to return to the palace immediately. Take her with you, complete the bond officially, and establish her as Luna Queen before word spreads further. It's the only way to protect her. No, George said firmly. I won't force Amparo into accepting the bond before she's ready, regardless of political pressure. Then you're signing her death warrant, Miriam said bluntly. Because the moment ambitious alphas realize there's a Moonfire Omega without a completed bond, they'll come for her. And some of them won't care about consent or sacred mate law or anything beyond adding her power to their own. The reality of the situation settled over me like a weight. I'd spent 5 years hiding from forced mating only to discover I was something so valuable that hiding had become impossible. The heat breaking through hadn't just revealed my location, it had announced my existence to every predator in the supernatural world. What do you want to do? George asked me, ignoring Miriam's urgency to focus on what actually mattered. This is still your choice, Amparo. We can complete the bond now for protection, or we can take our chances with keeping you hidden, or we can try something else entirely. But it's your decision. I looked at the moonfire marks on my skin, at Miriam's concerned face, at George's steady presence that had somehow become my anchor over the past 5 days. If we complete the bond, I asked slowly, what changes? You become Luna Queen, George said. My official mate, recognized by the entire supernatural world, under my protection with the full weight of the Alpha King's authority. No pack could claim you. No alpha could challenge the bond. You'd be as safe as I can make you. But I'd also lose my freedom to choose later. Once the bond is complete, it's permanent. Yes, he admitted. Completing the bond is irrevocable. If you're going to regret it, better to know now than after the marking ceremony. Miriam made an impatient sound. This is not the time for philosophical debates about autonomy. Practical reality. Amparo Barnett is now the most valuable unmated Omega in the supernatural world, and every ambitious alpha is going to come for her. You can protect her by completing the bond, or you can watch her get captured by someone less ethical. Don't pressure her, George warned, his alpha command bleeding through. This is her choice, not yours. Your Majesty, with all respect, she needs pressure. Because kindness and patience are wonderful qualities in a mate, but they're not going to stop the wolves who will absolutely kidnap her the moment they figure out where she is. As if summoned by the words, my wolf suddenly snarled a warning.
Danger. Close.
Coming fast. George felt it too through our partial bond. Someone's here. Multiple someones. I corrected. My enhanced senses finally working properly after 5 days without wolfsbane poisoning them. At least 4 different wolves. Moving fast. George's expression turned cold and dangerous. Miriam, take Amparo to the panic room. It's behind the bookshelf in the study. Don't come out until I give the all clear. I can fight, I started. You've been weakened by 5 years of wolfsbane and just survived catastrophic heat. You can't fight. So let me. He was already moving, his body language shifting from careful control to lethal preparation.
Go. Now.
Miriam grabbed my arm, pulling me toward the study. The bookshelf swung open at George's touch, revealing a reinforced room designed exactly for situations like this. Wait. I tried to resist, tried to stay with George, tried to help. Amparo. He turned to face me, and his eyes were pure gold now, his wolf fully present. Trust me. Let me protect you. Please.
It was the please that got me.
This Alpha King who'd asked permission before every touch was now begging me to let him defend me, to trust him with my safety. Okay, I whispered. He kissed my forehead quickly, a gesture so tender it made my chest ache. I'll come get you when it's safe. I promise. Then Miriam pulled me into the panic room, the bookshelf closing behind us, and I could only listen as the wolves outside began their attack. Moonfire Omega? the rarest bloodline in the supernatural world, and now everyone wants her. Plus, mysterious wolves are literally attacking right now. Hit that subscribe button because George is about to show exactly what happens when someone threatens his mate, and the next phase is all action. The panic room was soundproofed, which meant I couldn't hear the fighting outside. But I could feel it through the partial mate bond. George's fury, his combat focus, his absolute determination that no one would reach me. "This is bad," Miriam muttered, checking her communication crystal. 4 Frostfang wolves plus 2 rogues. They moved fast. Must have been tracking your scent when the heat broke through the wolfsbane suppression. Frostfang. My blood ran cold. Darius sent them? Almost certainly. Your Moonfireborn and his pack had prior claim on you before you ran. He probably sees this as reclaiming stolen property. She looked at me seriously. If they get past George, they'll take you back to Frostfang and force a bond with whichever of Darius's sons he's decided should have you. Your mate bond with George isn't complete, so pack law would technically allow it. That's barbaric. That's traditionalist pack politics. Miriam's crystal flared with urgent light. Oh no. What? More wolves incoming. 8 additional signatures from multiple different packs. Word is spreading fast. There's a Moonfire Omega at the Alpha King's private lodge. Her bond is incomplete. Whoever captures her first might be able to claim her. Terror clawed at my throat. This was the nightmare scenario I'd spent 5 years poisoning myself to prevent. Being valuable enough that multiple packs would fight over claiming me, my consent irrelevant compared to the power I represented. Through the bond, I felt George's emotions spike. Not fear. Alphas didn't do fear in combat. But fury. Protective rage, so intense it made my wolf whimper in response. Then his presence in my mind vanished completely, like he'd severed the partial bond or been knocked unconscious. "George!" I screamed, not caring that we were supposed to stay silent and hidden. "He's not dead," Miriam said quickly, checking her crystal. "But something's wrong. His life signature is spiking in ways I've never seen. His alpha presence is Moon Goddess. He's losing control." What does that mean? It means the Alpha King, who's spent his entire reign proving he's different from his brutal father, is about to show everyone exactly what happens when you threaten his mate. Miriam's hands were shaking as she manipulated the crystal. "We need to get out of here. If George fully loses control, this entire lodge could become a killing zone. I'm not leaving him. Amparo, you don't understand. When alphas lose complete control, they don't distinguish between enemy and ally. They become pure predators, destroying anything that moves. George has been holding back his true power for years. If that restraint breaks completely." The bookshelf exploded inward, torn off its hinges by something impossibly strong. George stood in the doorway, but he wasn't George anymore. His eyes were pure molten gold, with no trace of human consciousness. His body was partially shifted, somewhere between human and wolf, taking the most dangerous aspects of both forms. Blood covered him, though I couldn't tell how much was his versus his enemies. And his presence, the alpha dominance that had been so carefully controlled for the past 5 days, was now crushing weight that made even Miriam drop to her knees in instinctive submission. "George," I said carefully, the way you'd speak to a wild predator. "It's me. It's Amparo. You promised to keep me safe." "You did." "I'm safe." He moved toward me with liquid grace that was absolutely terrifying. Every instinct screamed to run, to submit, to do anything to appease the apex predator bearing down on me. But I'd spent 5 years learning not to run from my fears. "You're not a monster," I said firmly, holding his molten gold gaze. "You're my mate. My choice. The alpha who asked permission and treated me like a person. That wolf is still in there, and I'm asking him to come back now." George stopped inches away, a low growl rumbling from his chest. He reached for me with hands still partially clawed, and Miriam made a sound of protest. His hand settled on my face with shocking gentleness despite the claws. Mine, he growled, the word barely human. Threatened. Can't lose. Won't allow. You didn't lose me, I assured him, covering his hand with my own despite the danger. I'm right here. Safe because you protected me. But I need you to come back fully now.
Can you do that?
The gold in his eyes flickered, human consciousness fighting its way back through predatory fury. Amparo. I'm here.
I'm okay.
You can stop now. He collapsed forward, and I barely caught him before he hit the ground. The shifted aspects of his body returned to purely human, his crushing alpha presence pulled back to manageable levels, and the terrifying predator became just George again, exhausted, injured, and shaking with the aftershocks of losing complete control. I'm sorry, he gasped. I'm so sorry. I promised I was different, that I wouldn't become the monster, and then the moment someone threatened you, I couldn't. You protected me, I interrupted firmly. Against 12 wolves who came to kidnap me. You did exactly what you should have done. I killed them. All of them. Didn't even try to restrain or capture. Just killed. His voice was hollow. My father would have been proud. Your father would have killed them to prove his dominance. You killed them to protect my freedom. There's a difference. Miriam had recovered enough to move, checking George's injuries with professional efficiency. Cuts and bruises, nothing life-threatening. But Your Majesty, that level of control loss, it's not sustainable. The next time something threatens Amparo, you might not come back from the predator state so easily. Then we make sure there's no next time, I said, the decision crystallizing in my mind. George, I want to complete the bond. Not because I'm scared or being forced, but because I'm choosing you. The alpha who asked permission, who respected my autonomy, who proved he values my freedom enough to become a monster defending it. You don't have to decide now, George protested. Not after this. Not after watching me lose control. I'm deciding now because I watched you lose control, I corrected. You didn't hurt me, George. You didn't even consider it. Your wolf was in full predator mode, but you still recognized me as mate to protect, not threat to destroy. That's not your father's legacy. That's you proving you're different even in your worst moment. Amparo. Complete the bond with me, I said firmly. Make me your Luna Queen, and then help me figure out how to navigate this supernatural political nightmare with a Moonfire bloodline I didn't ask for and a mate I'm choosing despite every reason I had to keep running. George stared at me, searching my face for any sign of coercion or doubt. Whatever he saw must have satisfied him, because he pulled me close despite his injuries and exhaustion. Are you absolutely certain? Because once I mark you, once the bond completes, there's no going back. You'll be bound to me permanently, Luna Queen of the Crown Territories, stuck with an Alpha King who sometimes loses control when you're threatened. I'm certain, I said. I spent 5 years running from the wrong thing. I'm done running. Mark me, George. Make me yours properly. Show the entire supernatural world that Amparo Barnett chose her mate, and anyone who questions that choice can deal with both of us. His smile was exhausted but genuine. You're sure you're choosing an alpha who just murdered 12 wolves in a protective rage? I'm choosing an alpha who murdered 12 wolves and then apologized for it. That's such a you thing to do that I can't help but love it. The word hung between us, love, spoken for the first time, genuine despite the chaos. I love you too, George said quietly. I have since I caught your scent 5 years ago and spent every day since trying to find you. So yes, I'll mark you. I'll complete the bond. I'll make you Luna Queen and protect you against every threat the supernatural world throws at us. Then do it, I said. Right now, before something else attacks, or I overthink this decision. Mark me. Make me yours. Let me finally stop running. George looked at Miriam. You're witnessing this. Luna Queen Amparo accepts the mate bond freely, without coercion, despite knowing the Alpha King sometimes loses control in her defense. Witnessed, Miriam confirmed, pulling out documentation crystal. This bond is formed by genuine choice and mutual consent, recognized under sacred mate law. George kissed me then, our first real kiss, not just comfort during heat, but actual claiming of lips and breath and promise. His mark settled on my throat a moment later, the traditional alpha bite that declared me his mate to anyone with supernatural senses to detect it. Power exploded through our bond. The partial connection we'd maintained for 5 days suddenly completed, and I felt George in my mind, my soul, my very existence. And he felt me the same way, total, permanent, irrevocable connection. The moonfire marks on my skin blazed with light, responding to the completed bond by amplifying everything. George's alpha presence doubled in strength. My omega abilities, suppressed for 5 years, suddenly flowered into full manifestation. Together, we were something unprecedented, a bonded pair whose combined power exceeded anything the supernatural world had seen in generations. Well, Miriam said, staring at us with professional fascination and personal awe, that's going to complicate pack politics significantly. Let it, I said, leaning into George despite his injuries. The supernatural world has had 5 years to figure out how to leave me alone. Since they failed spectacularly at that, they can deal with the consequences of pushing me into choosing the most powerful alpha in the region as my permanent mate. George laughed despite the pain of his wounds. I think I'm supposed to be the one making threatening declarations about protecting my mate. You had your turn when you killed 12 wolves. Now it's my turn to be threatening. I looked at the destruction around us, at the blood and bodies George had left as evidence of his protective fury. We should probably leave before more attackers arrive. Agreed, Miriam said, already moving toward the door. The palace has better security and medical facilities. We can treat George's injuries properly and establish Amparo's legitimacy as Luna Queen before the next wave of ambitious alphas decides to try their luck. As we left the lodge, George leaning on me despite being twice my size, Miriam leading the way, our completed bond humming between us, I realized I was no longer afraid. 5 years of running. 5 years of poisoning myself. 5 years of believing that freedom meant isolation and that bonds meant imprisonment. But I'd been wrong. Freedom wasn't avoiding connection, it was choosing who to connect with. And I'd finally chosen right. The bond is complete. Amparo went from, I'll poison myself before accepting a mate, to, I'm choosing you, and anyone who questions it can fight us both, in 1 week. Character development at its finest. Hit subscribe because we still have to deal with the fallout at the palace, and I promise the court politics are going to be messy. The palace was nothing like George's hunting lodge. Where the lodge had been intimate and comfortable, the palace was vast and intimidating. Marble halls that echoed with centuries of pack history, formal chambers designed to impress and overwhelm, everywhere the weight of tradition and power that made my librarian instinct scream to find a quiet corner and hide. But I wasn't a librarian anymore. I was Luna Queen, whether I felt ready for the title or not. The council is convening in an hour. Miriam informed us as palace healers swarmed to treat George's injuries. They've heard about the attack, about the bond completion, about your moonfire bloodline. They're going to have opinions. Let them have opinions, George said, wincing as a healer stitched a particularly deep gash on his shoulder. Amparo is my mate by choice and sacred law. The council can accept that or find new employment. It's not that simple, Your Majesty, Miriam said carefully. Several council members have been negotiating potential political marriages for you for years. They've invested significant resources and reputation in those arrangements. The sudden appearance of a fated mate, especially a Moonfire Omega from a pack as problematic as Frostfang, is going to be seen as political liability. I'm sitting right here, I pointed out. And I can hear you discussing me like I'm a problem to be managed. You are a problem to be managed, Miriam said bluntly. Not because of anything you've done wrong, but because your existence disrupts years of carefully constructed political alliances. The Council will try to undermine your legitimacy, question your suitability, and generally make your life as Luna Queen as difficult as possible. Then I'll make their lives difficult right back, I said, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. I didn't spend 5 years hiding from forced bonds just to be intimidated by political functionaries who think pack hierarchy is more important than consent. George smiled despite his pain. That's my mate. Terrifying even without trying. I'm not trying to be terrifying. I'm trying to survive in a world that keeps insisting I'm too valuable to be allowed autonomy. I looked at Miriam. What do I actually need to know before facing the Council? Everything and nothing, she said cryptically. Everything about pack protocol, political alliances, historical precedent. But also nothing because you're Moonfireborn and bonded to the Alpha King. Your position is unassailable regardless of what the Council thinks. That's not helpful. No, but it's true. Miriam began packing her medical supplies. My advice? Don't try to be what they expect. Don't apologize for your background or your choices. You're Luna Queen because the Moon Goddess designated you as the Alpha King's mate. That's the only legitimacy you need. An hour later, I stood beside George in the council chamber, facing 7 elderly wolves who looked at me with expressions ranging from skepticism to outright hostility. Council members, George said formally, his alpha presence filling the room despite his injuries. I present Luna Queen Amparo, my fated mate, bonded by choice and sacred law. Your Majesty, Elder Tobias Reed spoke first, his weathered face carefully neutral. While we recognize the validity of a fated mate bond, we must express concern about the circumstances. Luna Queen Amparo comes from the Frostfang pack, has no political connections, no formal training in pack leadership, and has spent the last 5 years actively hiding from supernatural society. And yet the Moon Goddess chose her as my mate, George countered. Do you question the Moon Goddess's judgment? We question whether personal desire has been confused with divine designation, another council member, Lady Helena Ashford, said coldly. Fated mate bonds can be influenced by proximity, temporary attraction, even deliberate manipulation by those who understand scent chemistry. Are you suggesting my mate manipulated the bond? George's voice dropped to dangerous levels. We're suggesting that a Moonfire Omega who spent 5 years suppressing her scent might have extensive knowledge of pheromone manipulation, Lady Helena continued. Knowledge that could be used to create the impression of a fated mate bond where none truly exists. The accusation hung in the air like poison. That's absurd, I said, finding my voice despite the intimidation tactics. I didn't even know I was Moonfireborn until 3 days ago. I spent 5 years poisoning myself specifically to avoid bonds, not create them. So you admit to using wolfsbane for extended periods? Elder Tobias seized on this. That's illegal in most pack territories. It suggests instability, unreliability, a disregard for natural pack dynamics. It suggests I was surviving the only way I knew how after escaping a pack that planned to award me to an alpha's son like a trophy. I shot back. You want to judge my methods? Judge Frostfang's treatment of Omegas first. Judge the system that made poisoning myself seem like the better option. Then we can discuss my stability. Several council members looked uncomfortable.
Good.
They should be uncomfortable. The bond is complete, George said, his tone leaving no room for argument. Amparo is Luna Queen. These facts are not subject to council approval or debate. What is subject to discussion is how we handle the political fallout, starting with Frostfang's inevitable demand for her return. They have no legal claim, Elder Tobias said. Once a fated mate bond is completed, all prior pack affiliations are superseded. Darius Thornback can demand all he wants. Sacred mate law protects Luna Queen Amparo absolutely. But he will demand, Lady Helena predicted. And he'll frame it as stolen property, abduction of a promised mate, violation of pack agreements. He'll make this as politically messy as possible. Let him try, I said. I ran from Frostfang 5 years ago. I've been legally independent since then, with no pack affiliation and no obligations to Darius or his sons. Any claim he makes is based on traditions that violate modern Omega protection laws. You know pack law? Lady Helena sounded surprised. I spent 5 years reading everything I could find about supernatural legal structures. Had to understand the systems I was hiding from. I met her gaze directly. So yes, I know pack law. I know Darius has no legitimate claim. And I know that anyone supporting his attempts to reclaim me is essentially endorsing Omega trafficking. The council members exchanged glances. I just made it politically toxic to support Frostfang's position. There's still the matter of your suitability as Luna Queen, another council member, Lord Everett Stone, said. You have no political training, no experience with pack leadership, no connections among the noble families. How do you propose to fulfill the duties of your position? By learning, I said simply. And by not pretending I have expertise I don't possess. I'm not going to be a traditional Luna Queen because I have no idea how traditional Luna Queens operate. But I can be an effective one by being honest about my limitations and surrounding myself with advisors who fill knowledge gaps. That's surprisingly practical, Elder Tobias admitted. I survived 5 years alone with no pack support. Practical is kind of my specialty. I looked around the council chamber. Look, I understand this is complicated. I'm not the political match you wanted for the Alpha King. I'm not sophisticated or connected or trained in any of this. But I'm his fated mate. I'm Moonfireborn whether I wanted to be or not, and I'm not going anywhere. So we can work together to make this functional, or we can fight about it while actual threats, like the 12 wolves who attacked us yesterday, keep coming. Your choice. Silence stretched across the chamber. I like her, Elder Tobias said finally. She's blunt, practical, and doesn't pretend to be something she's not. That's more useful than another political climber who knows protocol but has no genuine capabilities. Agreed, Lord Everett added. Though we will need to assign advisors to help her navigate court politics. The noble families will try to exploit any perceived weakness. Let them try, George said. My mate has survived worse than social politics. Speaking of which, Lady Helena said, her tone shifting to something more calculating, there's a formal gathering scheduled for tomorrow night. The allied packs are already assembled. They came expecting the announcement of your political marriage to Lady Seraphine. They'll need to be informed of the change in circumstances. My stomach dropped. Wait, you are engaged to someone else? Not engaged, George said quickly. The council was negotiating on my behalf without my consent or interest. I never agreed to bond with Seraphine. But many people believed it was settled, Lady Helena continued. Lady Seraphine herself has been preparing for the role of Luna Queen for months. Her public humiliation when you present Amparo instead will create complications. Then let it create complications, George said coldly. I'm not responsible for managing the expectations of wolves who assumed they could force a political marriage I never wanted. Your Majesty, with respect, you're responsible for managing all political complications as Alpha King, Elder Tobias pointed out. Lady Seraphine's family is powerful and well-connected. Humiliating them could fracture important alliances. Then they should have spent less time assuming and more time confirming, I said. I'm sorry Lady Seraphine is disappointed, but George's personal happiness isn't sacrificial offering for political convenience. Well said, Elder Tobias agreed. Though be prepared, Lady Seraphine is not the type to accept defeat gracefully. She'll make tomorrow night's gathering as difficult as possible for you. I've dealt with difficult before. I can handle entitled betas who think they deserved the Alpha King. The council meeting continued for another hour, covering everything from security protocols to formal presentation procedures, to which noble families needed personal notification about the bond. By the end, I was exhausted and overwhelmed, but I'd survived my first political ordeal as Luna Queen. You did well, George said as we finally escaped to his private quarters. Better than well, actually. You managed to be honest without being rude, firm without being aggressive, and you made half the council like you despite their initial hostility. I made half of them tolerate me. I corrected. The other half still think I'm an unsuitable commoner who got lucky with a fated mate bond. Let them think that. Their opinion matters less than you think. He pulled me close despite his healing injuries. How are you really doing? This is a lot to process in a short time. I'm terrified, I admitted. 5 days ago, I was a librarian who poisoned herself to maintain isolation. Now I'm Luna Queen of the most powerful pack in the region, bonded to an alpha king I barely know, with a moonfire bloodline that makes me valuable to every ambitious wolf in the supernatural world. It's overwhelming. We can slow down if you need.
No, interrupta.
If we slow down, we give our enemies time to organize. Better to move fast, establish my legitimacy quickly, and deal with complications as they arise. I looked up at him. But I need you to promise me something. Anything. Promise you'll tell me when I'm making mistakes. When I'm missing political nuances, or saying things I shouldn't. I don't want to fail at this because I'm too proud to ask for help. I promise. Though I suspect you'll be better at pack politics than you think. You survived 5 years alone. That requires strategic thinking most nobles never develop. A knock at the door interrupted us. A palace servant stood there with a message crystal. Urgent communication from Frostfang Pack, Your Majesty. Alpha Darius demands audience regarding stolen property. Tell Alpha Darius he can submit his grievances through proper diplomatic channels, George said coldly. And inform him that referring to my Luna Queen as stolen property is considered grounds for formal challenge under sacred mate law. The servant bowed and left quickly. That was faster than I expected, I observed. Darius doesn't waste time. Neither do we. George pulled up a communication crystal showing various pack territories. Frostfang isn't the only problem. See these signatures? 8 different packs have requested emergency meetings since yesterday. They're all citing concerns about Moonfire Omega security and legitimate mate claims. They're circling like wolves around wounded prey. Exactly. Which is why tomorrow's gathering is so important. We need to present a united front, prove your bond with me is unbreakable, and make it clear that challenging your position as Luna Queen means challenging me directly. No pressure then. Just the fate of pack stability and possibly preventing multiple territorial wars. George smiled slightly. But other than that, it should be a relaxing social event. I threw a pillow at him. He caught it, laughing, and pulled me back into his arms. We'll handle this, he promised.
Together.
Every political complication, every ambitious alpha, every challenge to your legitimacy. You're not facing any of it alone. I know, I said, and surprisingly, I meant it. That's the difference between now and the last 5 years. I'm not running anymore. I'm fighting alongside someone who's worth fighting for. And someone who will burn down the entire supernatural world before letting anyone take you from me. George added, his voice dropping to that dangerous rumble that reminded me he'd killed 12 wolves to protect me. Try to restrain the burning down the world impulses until after tomorrow's gathering, I suggested. Diplomatic destruction first, literal destruction as backup plan.
Deal.
We spent the rest of the evening planning strategy for the gathering, which nobles needed personal attention, which alliances required reinforcement, how to handle Lady Seraphine's inevitable attempt at public humiliation. By the time we finally slept, I felt slightly more prepared for what was coming. Slightly being the operative word. Because tomorrow night, I was going to face the supernatural elite as Luna Queen. And they were going to do everything possible to prove I didn't deserve the title. This was going to be interesting. I'd never worn formal pack attire before. The traditional Luna Queen gown was heavy silk in silver and white, designed to showcase status and power. The moonfire marks on my skin, now permanently visible thanks to the completed bond, glowed softly through the fabric, making me look ethereal and otherworldly. I looked like Luna Queen. I felt like an imposter playing dress-up. "You're fidgeting," George observed as we prepared to enter the gathering hall. He looked devastatingly handsome in formal alpha regalia, dark suit with the Crown Territories insignia, his presence commanding without trying.
I'm terrified. Corrected.
There are 200 supernatural nobles in that hall, most of whom think I'm an unsuitable commoner who stole the Alpha King from his proper political match. This is going to be a nightmare. "Probably," he agreed cheerfully. "But you're going to handle it brilliantly because you survived worse with less support." That's not actually reassuring. I know, but it's true. He took my hand, the touch grounding through our completed bond. "Remember, you're not here to make them like you. You're here to establish that challenging you means challenging me, and I'm not someone they want to challenge. Everything else is secondary." The doors opened, and we entered the gathering hall together. The effect was immediate and overwhelming. 200 wolves turned as one, their attention focusing on us with predatory intensity. I felt their assessment, their judgment, their calculation of what my presence meant for pack politics. "Distinguished guests," George's voice carried absolute authority, silencing the whispers. "I present Luna Queen Amparo, my fated mate, bonded by sacred law and the moon goddess's blessing." The formal announcement was met with scattered applause, polite but not enthusiastic. I could feel the resistance, the disappointment from those who'd expected different outcome. And standing near the front of the gathered nobles, beautiful and furious, was Lady Seraphine. She wore a gown in Crown Territories colors, a deliberate statement that she'd expected to be standing where I was. Her expression was carefully controlled, but I could see the rage simmering beneath the polished surface. "Your Majesty," she said with perfect formal propriety, though her voice carried acid beneath the courtesy. "What a surprising development. We'd understood you were unattached. I've been searching for my fated mate for 5 years," George replied calmly. "My attachment has never been in question, just the location of the Omega the moon goddess designated for me. And you found her hiding in a human town, suppressing her heat with poison, actively avoiding the bond." Seraphine's smile was razor-sharp. "How romantic. I found her surviving the only way she could after escaping a pack that treated Omegas as property," George corrected, his tone hardening. "Her resourcefulness and determination to maintain autonomy are qualities I value, not flaws to be mocked." "Of course, Your Majesty." Seraphine turned her attention to me, and I felt the full weight of her aristocratic disdain. "Luna Queen Amparo, what an unexpected honor. I'm sure we're all curious about your background. Frostfang Pack, was it? I've heard such interesting things about their Omega treatment policies." The trap was obvious but effective. Either I defended Frostfang and allied myself with regressive pack culture, or I criticized them and appeared disloyal to my birth pack. "Frostfang's treatment of Omegas is exactly why I left," I said clearly, "and why I support Alpha King George's reforms to modernize pack culture throughout the Crown Territories. No Omega should face what I escaped." "How convenient that you escaped directly into the Alpha King's bed," Seraphine said with false sympathy. "Some might question whether your 5-year absence was truly hiding, or rather strategic positioning to create the appearance of fated mate bond when the political timing was optimal." Gasps rippled through the crowd. She'd just publicly accused me of manipulating the sacred mate bond, one of the most serious accusations possible in pack culture. "Lady Seraphine," Elder Tobias's voice cut through the shocked whispers. "You are suggesting Luna Queen Amparo falsified a fated mate bond. That accusation requires evidence or formal withdrawal. Choose quickly." "I'm merely expressing concerns that others share," Seraphine said smoothly. "Moonfire Omegas are known for their pheromone manipulation abilities. It's not unreasonable to question whether your disappointment at not being chosen has made you delusional. I interrupted, surprising myself with the venom in my voice. I spent 5 years poisoning myself to avoid any bonds. The idea that I somehow orchestrated meeting George specifically, that I manipulated divine designation itself, is not just insulting, it's irrational. And yet here you are, bonded to the most powerful alpha in the region, wearing Luna Queen's regalia, positioned to influence pack politics despite having no training or qualifications. Seraphine's mask slipped completely. Forgive me if I find the timing suspect. The timing was catastrophic, I countered. My heat broke through 5 years of suppression during a blizzard, nearly killed me, and led me to George's lodge purely by wolf instinct. If I'd been capable of planning any of this, I would have chosen circumstances that didn't involve hypothermia and near death. Perhaps. Or perhaps you're simply an excellent actress who knows exactly what story would appeal to an alpha king known for valuing consent and choice. Seraphine turned to the gathered nobles. We're expected to accept that a commoner Omega with no connections, no family, no qualifications beyond suffering, is suddenly Luna Queen because of a convenient bond. Meanwhile, those of us who've spent years preparing, learning pack politics, building alliances, were dismissed as political inconveniences. The gathered nobles shifted uncomfortably. She was voicing doubts many shared, not about the bond itself, but about my suitability despite it. Lady Seraphine, George said, his alpha command filling the hall with weight that made everyone instinctively step back. You question my mate's legitimacy. You suggest she manipulated sacred law and divine designation. You imply I'm too foolish to recognize manipulation when I encounter it. These accusations insult not just Amparo, but me as your alpha king. Your Majesty, I meant no disrespect to you. You meant every disrespect, he interrupted coldly. You've spent months assuming you'd be chosen as Luna Queen through political convenience rather than genuine connection. You cultivated that assumption through manipulation and social positioning. And now that genuine fated mate bond has superseded your political maneuvering, you're attempting to destroy my mate's reputation to salvage your own. The hall went completely silent. Here's what's going to happen, George continued, his voice dropping to lethal levels. You will formally withdraw your accusations against Luna, Queen Amparo. You will apologize publicly for questioning sacred mate law. And you will leave this gathering immediately, before I forget that we're supposed to be civilized and remember what happens to wolves who threaten my mate. You're threatening me? In front of the entire court. Seraphine's composure finally cracked completely. For questioning an Omega who appeared out of nowhere and claimed the position I've earned. You've earned nothing, I said, finding my own voice. You positioned yourself politically. You cultivated the right alliances. You did everything except actually deserve George's trust and affection. And now you're angry that divine designation and genuine connection mattered more than your careful planning. I would have been good Luna Queen. You would have been a competent political partner, I agreed. But George didn't want a competent political partner. He wanted fated mate who chose him freely. I'm sorry that wasn't you. But your disappointment doesn't justify attacking me or questioning sacred law. Seraphine stared at me with pure hatred. Then, with precise, deliberate movement, she reached up and tore the crown territory's colors from her gown. I withdraw my accusations, she said, each word dripping venom. Luna Queen Amparo's bond is legitimate. Her position is unassailable, and I apologize for any insult to sacred mate law. She met my eyes. But know this, Luna Queen. Political power built on nothing but divine designation is fragile. One misstep, one scandal, one moment of weakness, and everything you've gained will crumble. Is that a threat? George asked dangerously. It's a prediction. Seraphine turned and swept from the hall, her remaining allies following quickly. The silence after her departure was deafening. Then Elder Tobias began applauding. Well handled, Luna Queen. You faced direct attack with composure and honesty. That's more than most nobles manage in their first major confrontation. Other applause joined his, Not universal, but enough. The wolves who'd been skeptical now looked reassessing. The ones who'd been hostile seemed more cautious. I'd survived the first major political battle as Luna Queen. But Seraphine's words echoed in my mind. One misstep, one scandal, one moment of weakness, and everything you've gained will crumble. She was right. My position was built entirely on the mate bond and George's support. I had no political power base of my own, no family connections, no experience in pack leadership. I was one scandal away from proving every doubt correct. Lady Seraphine is big mad and making threats. Plus Amparo just realized her entire position depends on the mate bond staying strong. Hit subscribe because the next chapter brings the assassination attempt we've been dreading, and George is about to fully snap when someone tries to kidnap his mate. The gathering continued for another hour after Seraphine's dramatic exit, nobles approaching to offer congratulations or veiled criticisms depending on their political positions. I smiled, accepted well wishes, and tried to ignore the calculating looks that suggested several wolves were already planning how to exploit my inexperience. "You're doing remarkably well," Elder Tobias said quietly during a brief moment of privacy. "Most new Luna Queens take weeks to develop that level of political composure." "I'm terrified and faking it," I admitted. "That's what political composure is. Controlled terror performed as confidence." He smiled slightly. "The key is making sure no one realizes you're faking." Lady Seraphine realized. Lady Seraphine is furious and humiliated. She'd have attacked regardless of your performance. Tobias's expression grew serious. But her warning was an empty threat. She has allies who share her resentment, and they'll be looking for any excuse to undermine you. So, I need to be perfect. You need to be competent and have George's visible support. Perfect is impossible and not required. He glanced around the hall. Though I'd recommend staying close to security for the next few weeks. Seraphine's family has connections to some, less scrupulous wolves. You think she'd actually try something? I think a humiliated beta with a powerful family and wounded pride is dangerous. Be careful, Luna Queen. The gathering finally ended near midnight. George and I retreated to the palace gardens for air and relative privacy, though his guards maintained a discreet perimeter. "That was exhausting," I said, collapsing onto a bench. "You were magnificent," George countered, sitting beside me. "Faced down Seraphine's attack, held your own politically, and made half the nobles reconsider their skepticism. That's a successful first gathering by any measure." "I made enemies." "You had enemies before you walked into that hall. Now they just know you won't be easy target." He took my hand, the bond humming contentedly between us. "How are you really doing?" "Overwhelmed. Scared. Questioning whether I can actually do this." I leaned against him. 5 days ago, I was hiding in a tiny apartment poisoning myself. Now I'm Luna Queen facing supernatural politics I barely understand. It's too much too fast. We can slow down.
No, interrupt.
If we slow down, we give our enemies time to organize. Seraphine's already planning something, and Frost Fong is still demanding my return. We need to move fast and establish my position before. The attack came without warning. One moment we were sitting peacefully in the gardens. The next, guards were shouting, wolves were transforming, and something sharp hit my shoulder with enough force to spin me sideways. A dart. Tranquilizer designed for supernatural targets. Amparo. George's voice was distant, distorted by whatever drug was flooding my system. I saw him reach for me, saw guards converging, saw shadows moving with coordinated precision. Then everything went dark. I woke to the smell of blood and alpha fury. My shoulder throbbed where the dart had hit, and my head was fuzzy from whatever they'd dosed me with. But I was alive, unharmed beyond the initial capture. And George was absolutely destroying everything. I could feel him through the bond, not just his location but his emotional state. The careful control he'd maintained for years, the restraint that defined his leadership style, the civilized Alpha King who'd asked my permission before every touch during heat. All of that was gone. What remained was pure predatory rage. Through the bond, I saw what he saw. Palace guards unconscious or dead. Assassins in frost fawn colors trying desperately to retreat. And George hunting them with single-minded fury, his shifted form massive and deadly, his alpha presence so overwhelming it forced submission from wolves who'd probably never submitted to anyone in their lives.
He was killing them.
Not just fighting, killing. Methodically, brutally, with the efficiency of apex predator and the rage of mate denied. George, I sent through the bond. Stop.
I'm okay. You can stop now.
His consciousness barely registered my voice. The predator was fully in control, and it had one goal: eliminate every threat to its mate. I managed to sit up, assessing my situation. I was in the palace garden still, though farther from where we'd been sitting. The tranquilizer had knocked me out immediately, and the assassins had been moving me when George apparently caught them. From the sheer destruction around me, he'd caught them very thoroughly. Bodies lay scattered across the garden. I counted 7, all in frost fawn colors. Some were clearly dead, others dying, all bearing injuries that spoke to overwhelming force applied without mercy. And in the center of it all, George stood in partial shift, covered in blood, his eyes pure molten gold, with no trace of human consciousness. George, I said aloud this time, pushing myself to my feet despite the drugs still affecting my coordination. It's over. They're gone. I'm safe. He turned toward me, and for a moment I saw no recognition in those gold eyes. Just predator assessing potential threat. Then his consciousness flickered. Brief awareness before the rage pulled him under again. You promised, I said, moving closer despite every survival instinct screaming to run from the apex predator. You promised you'd always ask permission, always treat me as person, not property. That promise means nothing if you lose yourself completely every time I'm threatened. They tried to take you. His voice was barely human, words forced through shifted vocal cords. Can't allow. Won't permit. Mine to protect. I am yours to protect. But I'm also mine to protect. I reached out slowly, placing my hand on his blood-covered chest. And I can't protect myself if you're too lost in rage to hear me. Through the bond, I pushed calm at him. Not forcing, I didn't have that kind of power. But offering, showing him the steady ground of our connection that could anchor him back to humanity. His eyes shifted from molten gold to something more blue, more George. Amparo? I'm here. I'm safe.
You saved me.
Again. I smiled despite my own fear, and the tranquilizer still making me dizzy. But you need to come back fully now. Your guards are terrified. The council is going to have questions, and I really need you to be Alpha King George instead of Predator George for what comes next. He collapsed forward, and I barely caught him despite my smaller size. The shifted aspects returned to human, his crushing presence pulled back, and the terrifying predator became my mate again, exhausted, injured, shaking with aftershocks. I'm sorry, he gasped. I promised I wouldn't lose control. Promised I'd be different. And the moment someone threatened you, everything went red and I couldn't. You protected me, I interrupted firmly. 7 Frostfang assassins tried to kidnap me. They're all dead. You did exactly what you needed to do. I murdered them. Didn't even try to capture or restrain. Just killed. He pulled back, looking at me with desperate eyes. I'm becoming my father. The monster who rules through fear and violence. Your father killed for dominance and entertainment. You killed to protect your mate from kidnapping. Intent matters, George. Palace guards were finally approaching, weapons drawn but uncertain. Elder Tobias led them, his weathered face showing shock at the carnage. Your Majesty, he said carefully, we have the situation under control. Luna Queen Amparo is safe. You can stand down. Frostfang assassination attempt, George said, his voice steadier now but still showing the strain. They tried to kidnap Amparo during the gathering. Tranquilizer dart to incapacitate, then extraction. I intervened. We can see that, Tobias said diplomatically, surveying the dead wolves. This will have political consequences. Frostfang will claim you murdered their wolves without cause. I murdered their assassins who were attempting to kidnap my mate, George corrected coldly. If Darius wants war over that, he can have war. Your Majesty, we should handle this politically. I'm done handling things politically, George interrupted, his alpha command making everyone step back. Frostfang demanded Amparo's return as property. I refused. They responded by attempting kidnapping. I defended my mate by killing the kidnappers. That's the entire story, and anyone who questions it can challenge me directly. George, I started. No, he said firmly, though his hand on mine was gentle. I understand political nuance. I understand diplomatic solutions. But I also understand that if I don't make an example of this, if I don't show clear, brutal consequences for threatening you, then every ambitious alpha will think you're a vulnerable target. He turned to Elder Tobias. Send a message to Frostfang. 7 of their wolves attempted to kidnap Luna Queen tonight. All 7 are dead. If Darius wants to discuss reparations for the offense, he can do so through proper diplomatic channels. If he wants war, we're ready. Those are his only options. Your Majesty, starting a war over my mate's safety and autonomy?
Yes.
Absolutely. Without hesitation. George's voice was iron. I spent 5 years trying to reform pack culture through diplomacy and gradual change. That approach has failed to prevent assassination attempts on Luna Queen within 48 hours of her acceptance. So now we try the other approach. Make it so terrifying to threaten her that no one dares. That's your father's strategy, Tobias warned. My father used terror for control and entertainment. I'm using it for protection of my mate. Intent matters. George looked at the gathered guards. Increase palace security. Triple the Luna Queen's personal guard. And find out how 7 assassins made it into the palace gardens despite our protocols. There may have been inside help, one guard admitted reluctantly. Lady Seraphine left the gathering hours ago, but several of her family members remained. It's possible. Investigate them all, George ordered. Anyone connected to this attempt, accomplice, enabler, or passive observer, faces charges of conspiracy to kidnap Luna Queen. I want names by morning. The guards scattered to follow orders, leaving George and me alone with Elder Tobias. You're different, Tobias observed. The restraint is gone. You're not trying to be unlike your father anymore. I'm trying to protect my mate, George corrected. If that requires becoming the monster everyone fears, I'll accept that trade. Amparo's safety matters more than my carefully constructed image. George, I tried again. I know what you're going to say, he interrupted, finally meeting my eyes. That I don't have to become my father to protect you. That there's a middle ground between diplomatic restraint and total war. Losing control makes me dangerous. He pulled me close despite the blood and exhaustion. And you're right about all of it. But I'd rather be dangerous and keep you safe than civilized and lose you to the next assassination attempt. I don't want you to lose yourself protecting me, I said quietly. That's not the alpha I chose. Then what do you want? He asked desperately. Because I can't watch you get attacked without responding with everything I have. I can't be calm and diplomatic while wolves are trying to kidnap you. I can't be the restrained alpha king when my mate is in danger. I want the alpha who asked my permission, I said. Who valued my choice enough to ask before every touch. Who treated me like a person with autonomy rather than prize to be defended. I held his face between my hands. You can protect me fiercely without losing the qualities that made me choose you. Fury and consent aren't mutually exclusive. They feel mutually exclusive when I'm killing assassins who try to take you. Because you're conflating protection with control. You killed to preserve my freedom, to stop wolves who would have forced me back to Frostfang and taken away my choice. That's not your father's violence. That's defending the autonomy you value in me. Understanding slowly dawned in George's expression. So, you're not saying don't protect you. You're saying remember why I'm protecting you. Exactly. Fight for my freedom, not for your possession. Kill to preserve my choice, not to demonstrate your dominance. As long as the violence serves my autonomy rather than your control, you're not your father. You're my mate doing what's necessary. He kissed me then, desperate and grateful and still covered in blood from defending me. I don't deserve you. Probably not. But you're stuck with me anyway via divine designation and sacred mate law, so you'll have to make the best of it. Despite everything, the assassination attempt, the bodies, the political nightmare this would create, George laughed. Making the best of being bonded to you is literally the easiest assignment I've ever had. Even though I keep getting attacked and forcing you to commit justified murder? Especially then. Means life is never boring. Elder Tobias cleared his throat pointedly. Your Majesties, as touching as this is, we have significant cleanup to handle. 7 dead Frostfang wolves will require explanations, investigations, and likely war preparations. Then let's prepare for war, George said, his tone shifting back to Alpha King authority. Because I'm done pretending diplomatic solutions will stop wolves who see my mate as valuable property to be stolen. If Frostfang wants her back, they'll have to go through me. And after tonight's demonstration, they should understand exactly what that means. We left the gardens together, George covered in blood, me still woozy from tranquilizers, both of us bonded so deeply that our emotions bled together into single purpose. Protect each other. Fight for freedom. Build something better than the system that had tried to destroy us both. And if that required becoming monsters everyone feared, at least we'd be monsters together. 7 dead assassins. George fully snapped. And now Frostfang has to decide if they want war with the Alpha King. Hit that subscribe button because the epilogue wraps up this chaotic love story and shows what happens when you try to kidnap a Moonfire Omega from her protective M. 3 months after the assassination attempt, the supernatural world had adjusted to new reality. Luna Queen Amparo was absolutely off-limits, and challenging that boundary meant facing Alpha King George's fury without restraint. Frostfang had not chosen war. Darius Thornback, faced with evidence that his assassins had attempted kidnapping within palace walls, had formally withdrawn all claims on me and offered significant reparations. The alternative, total war with the Crown territories while George was in protective rage, was apparently too terrifying to contemplate. Lady Seraphine's family had been investigated thoroughly. 3 of her relatives were found complicit in the assassination plot, providing information about palace security and timing. They'd been exiled. Seraphine herself had fled the territories before charges could be filed, her political career destroyed, and her family's reputation shattered. And I had somehow become competent Luna Queen despite having no idea what I was doing. The reformed Omega protection laws passed council vote unanimously, Elder Tobias reported during morning briefing. That's 7 major reforms implemented in 3 months, unprecedented legislative speed. Fear of the Alpha King's wrath is excellent motivation for political cooperation, I observed. Indeed. Though your growing political skills have helped significantly. Tobias smiled slightly. You're no longer the terrified librarian who faced her first council meeting. You're becoming formidable in your own right. I'm becoming better at faking confidence, I corrected. There's a difference. Not as much as you think. The past 3 months had been an intense crash course in pack politics. I'd learned which nobles to trust, which alliances to cultivate, which battles to fight, and which to defer. I'd made mistakes, several spectacular ones, but George's visible support and my willingness to acknowledge errors had earned respect from even skeptical council members. More importantly, I'd learned to wield my Moonfire bloodline strategically. The enhanced abilities that came with the sacred lineage weren't just for amplifying George's alpha power. They also gave me supernatural influence that made nobles nervous about opposing me directly. I still didn't love being valuable, but I'd learned to weaponize that value for political leverage. The Eastern Territories have requested formal alliance, Tobias continued. They're specifically citing your Omega protection reforms as reason for wanting closer ties. Approve it, but include provisions that require them to implement similar reforms in their territories within the year. Using political capital to force progressive policy changes. Your Majesty would be proud. Your Majesty thinks his mate is terrifying and loves her for it, George said, entering the briefing room and kissing my forehead before settling into his chair. What else needs addressing? We spent the morning handling routine pack business, territory disputes, trade agreements, the 1,000 small details that kept the Crown territories functioning. It was mundane and exhausting and nothing like the dramatic assassination attempts and political battles. It was also surprisingly satisfying. You know what's strange? I said during lunch break, reviewing documents in what had become our shared office. I actually enjoy this. Enjoy what? Paperwork and political negotiations. Enjoy having purpose. Building something better. Using power to actually help wolves instead of just surviving day to day. I looked up from my reading. 5 months ago, I was poisoning myself to maintain isolation. Now I'm Luna Queen implementing reforms that protect Omegas throughout the territories. It's bizarre how much can change. Is it good bizarre or bad bizarre? Good. Definitely good. I moved to sit beside him. I still have moments of panic where I'm convinced I'm failing or making terrible mistakes. But mostly I'm just grateful that I stopped running, that I chose you, that the moon goddess apparently knew what she was doing with this mate bond. Even though it came with assassination attempts and political nightmares? Even though, because it also came with you. I kissed him softly. The alpha who asked permission and valued my choice and proved that power doesn't require domination. I killed 7 wolves to protect you, George reminded me. Lost control completely. Became the monster everyone fears. You became protective, mate defending my freedom. That's not the same as your father's violence, regardless of what it looked like. I'd spent 3 months reinforcing this distinction, helping George separate justified protection from tyrannical control. Though I appreciate that you've been working with combat trainers on controlled defensive fury versus uncontrolled rage. How did you know about that? I'm Luna Queen. I know everything that happens in this palace. I smiled at his expression. Also, Elder Tobias told me. He thought I should know my mate was trying to find middle ground between diplomatic restraint and protective rampage. I'm trying to be the alpha you chose, while still keeping you safe. It's complicated. Most worthwhile things are. A knock interrupted us. One of my personal guards, the security had indeed tripled after the assassination attempt, entered with message crystal. Luna Queen, there's a visitor requesting audience. She claims to be a relative from your time at Frostfang. Name, Elara Barnett. My heart stopped. My aunt? I thought I haven't heard from her in 5 years. I assumed Darius prevented any contact. Should I admit her? The guard asked. I looked at George, uncertain. Your choice, he said immediately. I'll be here if you want me present, or I can give you privacy. Whatever you need. Stay. I decided. Please. My Aunt Elara looked older than I remembered, silver streaking her dark hair, stress lines around her eyes, thin in the way of wolves who'd been living with constant fear. But her hug when she entered was warm and genuine. Amparo, she breathed. Moon Goddess, I've been so worried. When you disappeared, when Darius forbade anyone from searching, when I heard rumors you'd been poisoning yourself.
I'm okay. You should have.
I'm safe. A lot has happened. I can see that. Elara looked around the formal office, at George's presence, at my Luna Queen attire. You've done well for yourself. Better than anyone at Frostfang imagined possible. Why are you here? I asked gently. After 5 years of silence, why now? Because Frostfang is changing. Darius's sons challenged him after the assassination attempt failed. They're forcing reforms, real reforms, not just political performance. And they wanted me to deliver a message. She pulled out a formal document. Official apology from Frostfang Pack for how they treated you. Acknowledgement that their Omega policies were abusive. And formal requests that you consider advisory role helping them implement reforms based on what you've achieved in Crown territories. I stared at the document, too shocked to process. They want my help? I finally managed. The pack that was going to award me to an alpha son-like property wants me to advise their reforms? They want to avoid becoming like Frostfang was, Elara corrected. The younger generation recognizes that what happened to you, what they forced you to run from, was fundamentally wrong. They're trying to fix it. And they thought learning from someone who survived their worst policies might be valuable. I looked at George, who'd remained silent throughout the exchange. Your choice, he said again. No obligation to help the pack that hurt you. But if you want to turn your trauma into a tool for change, I'll support it. I read through the document carefully. The apology was genuine, detailed, acknowledging specific failures. The reform proposal was comprehensive. And the advisory role was entirely optional. I could participate as much or as little as I wanted. I'll consider it, I told Elara. I'm not ready to forgive Frostfang completely. But if they're genuinely trying to change, if my experience can help prevent other Omegas from facing what I faced, then maybe it's worth trying. That's all they're asking, Elara said. A chance to learn from their mistakes through the Omega who refuse to accept those mistakes as inevitable. She stayed for lunch, filling me in on 5 years of family news I'd missed. It was bittersweet, reconnecting with the few good parts of my past while acknowledging the trauma that had driven me away. After she left, I sat with George in comfortable silence, processing the unexpected reunion. Are you okay? He asked finally. I think so. It's strange, Frostfang destroyed me enough that I spent 5 years poisoning myself. But they also created me. Everything I am as Luna Queen, all the reforms I'm pushing, my understanding of what Omegas need, it comes from experiencing their worst policies and refusing to accept that as normal. Trauma as catalyst for change. Something like that. I leaned against him. I'm going to help them. Not because they deserve it, but because other Omegas deserve better than what I got. If Frostfang actually reforms, it sets precedent for other traditionalist packs. My suffering might prevent suffering for dozens of others. That's very Luna Queen of you, George observed. Is it? I still feel like librarian playing dress-up most of the time.
Good.
The moment you stop feeling that way, you'll have become the kind of noble who thinks they deserve power rather than needing to earn it. He kissed my temple. You're perfect exactly as you are, uncertain, learning, growing, but always trying to use your position to help others rather than just yourself. That night, we stood together on the palace balcony, looking out at crown territories we protected and the broader supernatural world we were slowly reshaping. 5 months ago I was hiding, I said quietly, poisoning myself, isolating from everyone, convinced that freedom meant being alone. And now I'm bonded, politically active, using power I didn't ask for to help wolves I'll never meet. It's everything I spent 5 years running from, and somehow it's everything I needed. George wrapped his arms around me from behind. You stopped running from the wrong thing. I stopped running from you. I corrected. The alpha who valued my choice enough to ask permission, who proved that bonds could enhance freedom rather than restrict it, who killed to preserve my autonomy rather than demonstrate his control. You make me sound much more noble than I feel. You make me sound much more confident than I feel. We're even. We stood there watching the sunset, 2 wolves who'd found each other despite 5 years of hiding and running, who'd built something unprecedented through consent and choice, who were reshaping supernatural culture one reform at a time. I had spent 5 years poisoning myself to avoid bonds. Turned out the right bond, chosen freely, built on mutual respect, defended fiercely when necessary, was the opposite of poison.
It was healing.
And I was finally genuinely free. And that's the story. Amparo went from poisoning herself with wolfsbane to becoming Luna Queen and reshaping supernatural society. She got her consent-asking Alpha King, survived assassination attempts, faced down entitled betas, and even ended up advising her traumatic former pack on reforms. What was your favorite moment? The Blizzard rescue? George asking permission during heat? The Gathering confrontation with Seraphine? The assassination attempt where George fully snapped? Or the epilogue showing how far they've come? Drop your favorites in the comments. Hit that like button if you loved this consent-focused alpha romance. And subscribe for more werewolf stories with actual character development, political intrigue, and alphas who understand that asking permission is the hottest thing ever. Thanks for following Amparo's journey from isolated librarian to powerful Luna Queen. Remember, the right mate doesn't restrict your freedom. They protect your right to choose, even when that protection requires becoming terrifying. See you in the next story, where we'll have more werewolf drama, more mate bonds, and definitely more alphas learning that consent is mandatory.